Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I am Ramon Mejia here, and we bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This week is episode number 91 of the podcast. Getting so close to episode 100. Had to figure out something special to do for that particular episode. If you have any suggestions, feel free to send a comment into feedback at geekbyspodcast.com or litrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Whatever works for you folks. But this week I have 5 new lit RPG reviews for you. I know that's not as many as I normally do. However, in my defense, I have one of them is over 1,000 pages, so that kind of counts for I think like 3 or 4 regular size LitRPG novels. So that kind of makes up the difference there. Also, don't forget to check out the interview I did with Jeff Sproul this past week as well. Author of Sigil Online Hellions, which just came out, so go check that out. Nice superhero LitRPG is the second book in that series. The first one I believe is Paragons. But you can check out the interview on our website at geekbyspodcast.com. Okay. Also, let's see, in the novels that I'll be reviewing for you this week include the one I just talked about, the interview I just did with Jeff Sproul, Sigil Online Hellions. Also, the Dungeons & Burdens, Slime Dungeon Chronicles Book 4, which is the last one in that particular series, according to the author. Also, Legacy of the Fallen, that's Ascend Online Book 2. Yeah, I know there was another one between book 1 and book 2. That was more of a side story. This is actually the next story for the main character, Lyrian Wrestler. And then also, let's see, 4 is going to be Transcendental Misappropriation. And then last but not least is going to be Logout of Cthulhu, a Lovecraftian lit RPG novel. It's also called a LitRPG or horror story somewhere in like the regular title, but there it is. Those are the 5 folks. But of course, we begin our show though with LitRPG news. Oh, also, if I happen to look like totally super sore and move around a little stiffly today, it's because Charles Dean, the author, has come in on a very tight regimen of exercise and a dietary restrictions. Apparently, some people were complaining that I'm starting to get a little comfortable in my old age on the podcast, and we've decided part of the new year we're going to help each other get in shape. So we started that today, and man, am I sore. So there you go. But in actual LitRPG news, we're going to have only one story. There's only one thing that happened that involves the entire community. Blaze Corbin, author of Delvers LLC and SOO, is planning to create a whole new website dedicated to helping people find good game and lit RPG stories. He plans to, with the help of other authors and community members, to create almost a review aggregation site for various game and lit RPG stories. If you want to help support the endeavor, he's actually set up a Patreon page that he hopes to use to get the funds to make a well-organized and streamlined site. So if you want to go check that out and support him or that particular endeavor, it is patreon.com/GameLitRPG. And some people may ask, isn't this kind of what you do, Ramon? I'm like, sort of, yeah, except that I specialize very specifically in LitRPG. That's the thing that interests me. Blaze plans to expand essentially kind of the same thing I do with some other game-related subgenres like Lit FPS, Game Lit, and some other guys. So it's all the best luck to him, and I definitely plan to support him myself. Okay, and that's it for LitRPG news. Some stories that have come out recently that I have not had a chance to pick up, or read, I should say, is Soul Reckoning, which is the second book in the Veil Walker series, written by Isaac Winter. Also out is Etheria Offline by Cube Kid. This one seems to be based very much on Minecraft. So I'm not sure how legal that works, but it's out there if you want to go check it out. Have not read it yet. I plan to read it later. Also out is Down She Falls, a lit RPG. The World of Ignat series, book 1. So there you go. And also out is War God's Mantle, Ascension, a LitRPG adventure, the War God Saga, written by J.E. Hunter and Aaron Crash. J.E. Hunter, you might remember from some other series, which we'll be talking about later. Okay, in LitRPG audiobooks, there's quite a few that just popped up, including Critical Failure's Book 5, Harmon Cooper's The Last War of Ungaia, Book 2, Eden's Gate, Book 3, The Sands is also out as an audiobook, and J. Hunter, this is the same author, the Audioverser, author of the Viridian Gate Online series. So if you like his stuff here, you might want to check out his newest release as well. Also written with another co-author. And also out is Encode, which is the third book in the Next World series. And also out is Don Chapman's Desert Runner Paternia Online, Book 1. So that one is out as an audiobook as well, read by Andrea Parsnew. So quite a few new audiobooks that just dropped this week. So go check them out. And of course, in the show notes, we have links for all of our reviews for the ebooks versions of all those stories, in case you can't remember if you have already read them or not. So there you go. Okay, upcoming LitRPG. This is just where I list off the titles that I didn't know about are coming up. Have quite a few new entries this week to the list. This includes Headshots 2 in the Head. The author sent me a notice saying that he planned to publish this week. He didn't give me any cover art though. He did give me an advanced reader copy, so I plan to read that this weekend. But he did say he planned to have this out this week coming up. So I'm just putting it out that it should be coming up. Also supposed to be coming up is Dungeon Crisis, a LitRPG Dungeon Core Adventure, Book 2, which is out on January the 15th. The Trap with the Potentate, Dark Herbalist, Book 3, that one will be out on January the 17th. On the 22nd of January, this one's actually kind of a surprise. It's Different Sides, Feyroll, Book 7. So that one just kind of popped up. On the 22nd of January, to be The Laboratory, Book 3, The District, a futuristic Dungeon Core novel. So on the 24th of January, to be The Reapers, The Neuro, Book 3, which I think is actually available as a hardcover currently, which is a little weird, but it's out there. On the 30th of January, it'll be Return to a Dungeon. This one is new. It's a Monster MC LitRPG book. Very nice cover. Very interesting title, I should say. So looking forward to checking that one out on the 30th of January. On the 1st of February, it'll be Bushido Online, Friends and Foes. So this is the second book in that particular series, I believe. Quite a few people enjoyed it. I didn't like book 1 personally that much, but some other folks really did enjoy the change of pace as far as like the setting goes. So it'll be out on February 1st. February the 28th, it'll be Kingdom Level 4. On the February sometime in that month, according to the author. The last book of The Way of Shaman will be out, called Clan Wars. March the 12th, it'll be Avatar's Rising, Silos, Book 1. And March 16th, it'll be Achilles' Reign, Paternia Online, Book 4, again by Don Chapman. So there we go, folks. Those are all the stuff I know about that's coming out in the near future. On to new releases and reviews. And in new releases and reviews, I'm going to begin with, of course, the first book that we have here. It's going to be Hellions, which is Sigil Online, Book 2, written by Jeff Sproul. And again, really go check out that interview that I had with the author. It was nice guy, very entertaining. I met Jeff in person at Dragon Con in 2017, which is just last year, which seems like a weird thing to say. And really nice guy. He was a quest giver, which was a cosplay. It's all explained in the interview. Also learned that he has a steampunk tattoo, and he has experience designing games. So that kind of explains his interest in LitRPG, besides being, of course, an avid gamer. The review portion of this, though, the novel is 303 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, which is always nice. I will read you the author's description. For Riley and his friends, Sigil Online has never been more real. With the latest expansion, pain has been enabled and will now affect all players in-game. Aptly named Hellions, the expansion introduces monsters, but not the kind that Paragon's been fighting for the past several years. This time, the players can be the monsters that they once sought to destroy. But in a game where playing means having the money to survive in the world, what will Riley do when death in the game doesn't just mean an end to his character, but an end to his life. There we go. Okay, full disclosure, the author sent me an advance copy for review. I purchased the novel as soon as it became available. I like to support the authors that I review sometimes. Now, basic review without getting any spoilery. This is a very action-filled transition into a huge world expansion. Just to give you a quick recap, Book 1 tells the story of a new experience of Riley as he restarts his character in a permadeath-enabled superhero VR MMO. The game system itself in Sigil Online, I should say, has some very interesting progression mechanics where items play a very big role in the progression system. Like there are tiers of powers and there are also levels, but the levels automatically increase your stats so that the players don't assign stat points necessarily. But the thing that they can change and can modify is the items that they get. Like the items that they receive in game not only supplement their stat points, but they can actually modify their actual powers and abilities, whether it's increasing range, or giving them more damage possibilities or heal possibilities, or even just changing the way the powers work on a fundamental level. So items are a big thing in this game, according to Book 1. In Book 2, the story shifts a little bit from that individual story from the main character, Riley, and is less focused on the individual progress of the main character. Instead, the novel kind of focuses on player versus player action, and that's kind of the big thing in this particular novel. Hellions is supposed to be the name of an expansion pack to this online game called Sigil Online, and where players, when they die, they lose their character. But with this new expansion, players don't have to re-roll a new hero character. They can re-roll a new villain character. So it's very much in the line of City of Heroes, Series of Villains, where the players can play villains or Hellions, as they're called in this particular instance. And in this particular novel, it focuses on Riley and his friends as they make their own guild, and they go on these quests or these adventures to save the city from the Hellions. But it's a very super action oriented, and there's some very good battle scenes, I have to say. But there are some negatives that kind of drew away my personal appreciation and enjoyment of the story, and that's mostly because it is a shift from what the emphasis was on in Book 1, and I think that's good for some people, and for other people, they're going to be like, oh, I miss those things. And I was kind of one of those people. For example, there's almost no real-world plot development. In Book 1 of the series, the main character, Riley, it was a super big deal, the fact that he lost his job and that he was playing this game to make a living. In Book 2, that storyline almost doesn't exist. Like, there's a few references to it, but that development of anything meaningful in the real world, not really an issue anymore. Basically, Riley's kind of set. There are also just a few plot lines and story points in Book 2 that get muddled. As introduced by the novel description, with the Hellion expansion, there is an introduction of a pain mechanic in which players actually feel pain. And it's a very interesting idea, and it raises the stakes in the story in a very Sword Art Online kind of way. But it's not really consistently described in all the stories, and I should say in all the fights in the story. In some fights, the heroes are just getting their butts beat, and the main character is getting injured severely, yet he doesn't seem to feel the effects of pain as is described in earlier portions of the novel, where even getting a paper cut or getting hit by friendly fire is severely painful. So there's a little inconsistency there. However, the biggest issue in the story is probably going to be the ending. There are issues with lesser RPG mechanics in there, but I guess that's just a shift in focus. But the biggest issue for a lot of people is probably going to be the ending of the story, and it was for me at least. Like I said, most of this is just very action oriented, and if you're looking for that, great. But the end just was this weird, huge twist that for me just kind of came out of left field. I didn't think there was any foreshadowing of it, and it kind of left me shaking my head. I was like, what, huh? Where is this all coming from? Who's this guy? Why is that person suddenly acting that way? It for me was not, it didn't line very well for me. And in a larger scope of this series, it absolutely leads directly into Book 3, where there's supposed to be some new mechanics, like city building and whatever, introduced. I'm going to spoil the mechanics for you. But in Book 3, there's a bunch of new changes that are coming, and this ending in Book 2 definitely leads in that direction. But as far as providing a satisfying conclusion to Book 2, I'm didn't for me because, like I said, the events that happened at the very end portion of it was like, where is this coming from? I'm like, literally, people like appear, and I'm like, I've never heard of this dude. And like, it's a, like I said, you can go read it, form an opinion of your own. But for me, it just kind of dropped my level of appreciation for the story from a 7 to about a 6. Like I said, most of the story really good. And if you don't care about that ending, great. If you want something that's like super action oriented and focused, this is gonna do you for you. I mean, there's plenty of superhero powers. There are plenty of player versus player opportunities and some interesting stuff having to do with, of course, superheroes and villains, and the way that the villains have kind of an advantage in this particular expansion. Very cool stuff there. But for me, again, just dropped it just enough. I'm like, oh man, I can't give this a 7 out of 10 because that ending just like was not enjoyable for me, at least. Like I said, overall, everything else is like really quite fine. There's some other issues, of course, we talked about. But for me, Sigil Online Hellions gets a 6 out of 10, but don't let that stop you from go checking it out. It's on Kindle Unlimited. If you like book 1, you're probably going to like book 2. Okay, on to our next review. It is Jeffrey Falcon Logue's The Dungeon Burden, The Slime Dungeon Chronicles, book number 4. Okay, this one is 540 pages, $4.49. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, so this one is quite beefy itself. Let's see, the author's description. It's the final battle. The Empire plans to come to fruition. Durin is fallen, and with it, the other city-states of Nehalta. Only the dungeon town remains safe, but for how long? While the leadership struggle to deal with crisis, the dungeon dwellers watch on. As Doc continues to unlock new slime evolutions, Rowan deepens his bond with Millie, and the two experience much together. When the final attack begins, will Rowan and Doc stand with the townspeople? Why has Doc been framed for murder? Who is the traitor lurking in the shadows? Everything comes together in this final epic tale of dungeon glory. The chronicle ends here, but the war and the dungeon have only just begun. So there we go. This again is apparently the final book in this particular series for the Dungeon Chronicles series. So this is the end, and actually has a pretty good ending. Like they're all the storylines are tied up for the most part. There is potential for the author to return to this particular character and this particular dungeon later on if he so chooses, but he doesn't have to. This is not a bad place to start. And as of the time I wrote this actual review, this novel was listed as number 1 in spine-chilling horror, which makes me kind of giggle and laugh because I didn't know that there was such a category in Amazon. And I guess Amazon thinks that this is a horror story. It might have something to do with that creepy skull, on the cover, and that early description of the novel, like the dungeon murdering adventurers and kind of tearing them to pieces so the slams can devour them. That might be part of it. I don't know. But this is a pretty easy review for me. I had a good time reading it. This has long been one of my favorite series, and it's an enjoyable ending to the series. So there you go. There's some nice sub-stories in the novel, some that are sad, some that are funny, some that are even romantic. There's political intrigue that's introduced and some nice new slime evolutions. However, there is very little dungeon diving in this particular story. And if you read the story, it all makes sense as far as why, but just a heads up. Most of the early parts of the story, they're really just like a gigantic setup for the last 25%, where there's a huge series of battles and they're really kind of epic, and I enjoy them personally. More than worth the wait in any story. Like the last one from it is just like plot twist and action galore. So good stuff and a great way to end the series for me. So Dungeon Burden Slime Dungeon Chronicles book 4 for me gets a score of 7 out of 10. I had a good time. Okay, on to Legacy of the Fallen, Ascend Online Book 2, written by Luke Chimolenko. So there we go. This one is 731 pages. It is $6 even. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Now, full disclosure, the author sent me an advance copy for review. I purchased the novel when it came out, but I should think this page count on this novel is very much off. Like when I read it on my e-reader phone application, it says it's like 1,400 pages, and usually that roughly translates to like me knocking up about 30%, and that's what Amazon usually says. But in this case, Amazon is putting it at like 730 pages, which I think is is incorrect. I think it should be at least 1,000 pages long. It's a ton of words in this particular novel. So just heads up that this is probably beefier than you even Amazon realizes. Author's description, though. Fresh off their victory over Graves and his followers, Marcus and his friends have managed to enjoy a few weeks of relative calm and peace as they continue to build Alfred, preparing the town for a new wave of settlers coming from Iberia. But as the days wore on and no new arrivals in sight, they begin to fear the worst, eventually setting out to search for their promised reinforcements, and soon realizing that they aren't as alone on the frontier as they thought they were. Just managing to rescue a caravan of settlers in the nick of time from a horde of bandits, Marcus and the rest of Virtus barely have the chance to catch the rest before they find themselves thrust in the middle of Iberian politics, revealing a plot that threatens to not only take away their hard-won independence, but to destroy Alfred completely. So there you go. That's the author's description, and that is all very true. So there you go. This is a great second book in the Ascend Online series. There's all the action, adventure, and leveling galore and game mechanics and RPG stuff that you come to love from book one. That you came to love, I should say, from book one. But for me, the thing that always stands out in this particular novel and in this particular series is the author's gift with dialogue. And what I mean by that is the fact that when I read about the conversations and the banter between Lurian and his group, it always makes me feel like I'm hanging out with old friends. And that to me is just a joy. Like every time I read these novels, it just makes me so happy to read them because it feels like I'm hanging out with friends and we're going on adventures together. And, like I'm playing this game with my friends or something, and I'm invested in their well-being. And it, like I said, the author just has a way of making you care about these characters and just feel so welcomed into this world. And I think that's, not the case with every novel that I read. Like other novels have their, high points and everything. I just think that is this novel's secret formula, I guess, and that it pulls you into the world and it makes you care about the characters and it makes you feel like you're just one of their gang and friends. So there you go. Of course, there's also other great things here. Great, huge, interesting variety of fights. Old enemies return that you didn't like, and they're still bad people. There is new threats, of course. There's an introduction of some political intrigue. So the novel's enemies are actually changing, and they're becoming more complicated as a storyline. Because, for me, political intrigue, I can never write it because it's annoying to me. And it just makes my brain crazy when I think of it. And so the fact that it's done here and it's done well is kind of nice, I have to say. There are also some new developments for the town as more player characters come in. Some you might recognize from other Ascend Online books. No spoilers, but you'll see them here as well. And of course, with new players come new issues. So there you go. But again, one of the few things I could probably say about the novel, like maybe could have been modified a little bit. There's a kind of a too long of a dungeon run about the middle of the story. It's about 20% of the entire novel, which for 1,000 pages is kind of significant. And I think it kind of went on just a little bit too long. Not that it wasn't enjoyable, but like that's a long dungeon run. Like I said, besides that small little thing that didn't really draw anything away from it, I really did enjoy reading this novel. And I just wish the book 3 was ready. I enjoyed it a lot. It gets a score of 8 out of 10 for me. That's Legacy of the Fallen, Ascend Online Book 2 with a score of 8 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, on to our next review. It is written by Robert Harper, Transcendental Misappropriation, Book 1 of the Pentacle series. So there we go. It is 380 pages, $3.99, very nicely priced. It, however, is not available on Kindle Unlimited, so not everybody's going to have a chance to pick this up. It is, again, for about $4, just slightly more expensive for an ebook, but for the page count, it totally makes sense. And here is the author's description, short description. Danny's life was going to hell. He had a steady job. Danny's life was going well. Very different statement. He had a steady job and plans to buy his own place. That was until some rogue junk mail decided he needed a change of scenery. Now Danny's got a new start in another world, and he needs to make sure he doesn't squander this opportunity at making the most of his new life. So there we go. Now, if that doesn't tell you anything about the story, I understand. This is, again, a slice of life, a reincarnated into an RPG world story. So there are a couple of things here. One, the main character gets reincarnated from our world when he dies as a chemist to a fantasy RPG world. So there you go. So he starts out as a baby, actually as a baby inside of his mother's womb, if you want to get technical. And then he's born and he lives his life. And that's pretty much what the story is. The story starts out with him there, being born and kind of figuring out, oh, I'm a baby again, except that he has all the memories that he had from his old life on Earth. And he has access to a very interesting mechanic called a sanctuary, which is kind of a mind space palace. If you ever watched the BBC show Sherlock, it's kind of like that. And the main character can kind of go into his own mind, and he sees a room, and he sees a bunch of books on walls, and all those books have things like his stats or his skills that he has. And that's kind of the RPG mechanic that the author is using to reflect the main character's growth in the story. And that's the RPG stuff there. That will later on in the novel looks into things like magic or combat skills and a bunch of other stuff. And as the character grows, the more skill levels he gets, the more things he can unlock. So it's very much progression in an RPG fashion, but there is also the slice of life aspect to this, right? And that's mostly what this is. There's no huge big plot. There's no like evil overlord trying to take over the entire world and the main character has a choice and want to stop them. Nope, none of that exists. It really is just the main character growing up, learning about his family, learning about the world around him, and an RPG progression system as he tries to figure out what magic is and learn his new skills like mercantilism and other things. This is, again, a rather long book in itself. And going through it, I basically realized that there are three main story arcs. The first one is the infancy arc, as I call it. It's from up until like the 1 to 25% mark. The main character realizes, again, this is going to be a little bit spoilery, folks, so if you want to skip ahead, feel free to do so. But the reason I say is because I almost have different reviews for each section and aggregate them for a final review, because they almost feel like three different parts of a story. Like the author really could have put this as book 1, book 2, book 3, and it would have made perfect sense as far as like the encapsulated arcs. I believe this was written originally as a serial online and then kind of put together, and there's more of it online if you want to go check it out. But the first arc, the infancy arc, is the first 25% of the novel, and this is the point where the main character he's on Earth, and then he's reborn after he dies, and it's really about him realizing that he's existing in a fantasy world with RPG mechanics. And the thing I kind of liked about this particular part of the story was that you get to see this entirely new world from the point of view of an infant, and later on like a toddler, and then a young kid. And it's kind of the way that the main character learns, and that he doesn't automatically know how to speak the language of these people. He, for example, has to learn it word by word, the same way that anybody else would. He just has the advantage of an adult memory system in that, and his ability to learn a new language system. And the same thing goes into magic, how the main character, even as an infant, tries to learn how to use magic once he learns that it exists. And he in his mind, he takes it into he looks at it from like a scientific point of view because he was a chemist in our world. But the physical reality for him is that he's an infant and he has to get changed by his mom. And there are little hints as the story goes on and the way that the world is seen through his eyes, that things about culture and world building. And I really like the way that the author kind of sprinkled it here and there, the same way that a child or an infant will learn it in real life. Like they don't get to know everything all at once. They don't go to school necessarily as an infant. So anything they do is they learn is things they picked up from their parents. And I thought that was a really cool way to let the reader learn about the world the same way that a child would. I liked it a lot. That's probably my favorite part of the entire novel, is that first 25%, because a lot of it is just the main character figuring out how magic works, and it's a very interesting and intuitive way to look at a magic system. So enjoyed it. The next arc is the Magical Academy arc, and that's from about 25% to the halfway point in the story, 50%. And the title tells you anything. I mean, these are my titles. The author's not actually titling these, but that's what is happening. At a young age, the main character is sent away to a magical academy where he has a rich jerk rival. He learns about more like learning from like teachers and books about magic and the larger culture of the world, and there's more world building there from that perspective. And the thing I like the most about here is because the main character actually gets to learn the formalized version of what magic is and how he's a little overpowered because he's had like 7 years of like self-taught magical training and experience. And that was kind of cool to see him do more experiments in the Magical Academy and become even more overpowered a little bit. So good stuff, enjoyable. Now, the last part, the last arc, is from about 50% mark to the 100% mark in the story. And this I titled The Adventure Time, because that's mostly what it is. The last arc of the story, again, I'm not going to spoil any details, but the main character mostly devotes a lot of the story to adventuring, killing monsters, going on quest, fulfilling job or quest requirements, whatever. There's a lot less magical theorizing here than there are in the first two arcs. And that's fine. Stories have to change and expand. Because we remember, from the author's point of view, this story might have taken him a year, 2 years to write, a little bit at a time. And so story changes to go on. But for me, this last section, this last arc, kind of lost the stuff that I was really enjoying about 1 and 2. And that's just fine. It is what it is. The action's not boring or anything. It's just, it's fine. There's also a little bit of a harem thing going on there, which is weird for a 7-year-old in the story, and then eventually like a 12-year-old. But it's fine. Again, not my favorite section, but it's not like horrible or anything. It's not bad. It just wasn't as good as arc 1 or arc 2 for me. So, okay, overall, had a good time reading the novel. Again, I especially like the Sanctuary Inner Mind Palace aspect for the RPG mechanic. Really unique. I thought it was really cool. And again, it is a slice of life story though, so not everybody's gonna like that. So if you don't mind reading something that's a daily adventure of the main character kind of story, this is it. This is fun. If you like it, great. This is for you. If you don't like that kind of story though, if that kind of non-plot story where there's like this big, like actual big story arc, don't read this, because this is gonna bug you. But for me, I had a really good time with it. It was really kind of relaxing to read because I knew just from the beginning, like, oh, this is slice of life. This is just a kickback. I followed the main character on his journey wherever it goes, and I don't have to worry about like an evil overlord or anything. So for me, it was almost a very relaxing read that I could put down and pick up at my leisure, and I didn't feel like I was like missing anything. So very enjoyable. Had a good time with it. Get to score a 7 out of 10 for me. So that's Transcendental Misappropriation, book 1 of the Pentacle series, with the score of 7 out of 10. There you go. Okay, last book, folks. It is Logout of Cthulhu, a Lovecraftian LitRPG novel, Cthulhu World, book 1. Okay, here we go. It is 197 pages. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. This is the author's description. Some knowledge cannot be unknown. Reeling from the loss of his family, game tester Bobby Walmore is contracted to work his way through an augmented reality park. The headset reveals a virtual world inspired by the horror works of H.P. Lovecraft. The game rapidly turns into more than a paycheck. It's an addiction Bobby cannot turn away from. Every clue he uncovers and every mystery he solves leads him deeper. The twisted lore of forces. That's what it says. Forces lurking in the shadows. And Cthulhu World holds darker secrets than Bobby was ever prepared for. So there we go. Meets deeper down the twisted lore. Anyways. Okay. So the story is, again, 197 pages, $4.09. So it's a little expensive, but it is available on Kindle Unlimited. So I wouldn't probably buy it. If you want to just give it a chance on Kindle Unlimited, feel free to do so. This is, again, an augmented reality lit RPG horror story based on Lovecraft lore. So there's a lot of stuff in there. The main mechanic in the story for getting the game stuff there is augmented reality, so which is different than virtual reality. Virtual reality is when you put on a headset or you're in a VR pod and everything around you disappears. You exist in a computer simulation, whether it's going to be interacting with it with wands or whatever, or it links to your mind. So you're existing in the game. Everything around you is the game. Augmented reality differs in the fact that game elements are overlaid upon actual reality. So if you're looking around your room, maybe, if you have augmented reality glasses on, your cup has, a damage, has an endurance of like 1 point, and it has, X +2 to bonus drinking capability or whatever, right? But it's the game elements overlaid on what's actually happening in the world around you. So that's augmented reality. It augments reality. So there you go. And that's the technical technology that the author decided to use in this particular story. So the novel is actually set in a theme park based on Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft. For those who don't know what that is, it's like older story stuff where it's like people from other or creatures from other dimensions, or just ancient entities of the deep. It's supposed to be like this older version of horror where it's supposed to be suspenseful, but also like mixing in the occult and cultists and just like sanity losses, and it's a really complicated subject. There are a bunch of actual like tabletop and RPG games based upon that lore. It's very popular in some circles. And the author is attempting to describe in his story a theme park based on that, and it's as happy sounding as you think it is. The main character Bobby has been hired to test the Lovecraft theme park. So when he puts on the AR goggles, game elements are added to the theme park. Like there will suddenly be NPCs walking around, but the actual town exists. Like everything, all the buildings exist, and you can walk in and out of doors. It's just so when he has a headset on, he can talk to NPCs and he can actually feel pain, which is weird. I won't get into how that bugs me. And he can also hold objects that are virtual. Again, no technical explanation of why that happens, but that's a part of this particular experience with the AR goggles. But when he takes them off, everything's just normal. They're just blank buildings with paint, puts them back down. All that paint is gross and ugly, and the whole town looks more run down, etc. So there you go. So it's a very interesting concept. The execution, though, falls flat, at least for me. Again, the game mechanics and story, they're there. This is absolute LitRPG, no question. But they are basic, and they're consistently used. The main character, Bob, again, gains stats from interacting with the world and the other characters. For example, when he talks to an NPC, he can gain a charisma stat, a charisma +1 by drawing information out of them that he needs to complete his quest. Or if he lifts a particularly heavy object, he gets a +1 to strength. Or if he sneaks around really well and doesn't get caught, he gets a +1 to sneaking. Ultimately, these stats don't really mean diddly squat in the story because, again, they're not affecting his real life abilities. And at the most, they maybe augment like the magic powers he gets a little bit later, but that's about it. The one thing that does, again, in the game mechanics tying to H.P. Lovecraft is the sanity points. There are several game mechanic rules out there about Lovecraft stuff, but the consistent one is a sanity check. Like as the characters see weirder and weirder things, they lose sanity points, and if they lose all their sanity points, they go crazy. And there are ways in actual RPG mechanics and actual RPG games where they can regain sanity points, but that doesn't exist here. So the main character can only lose his sanity as he continues on with the story. Again, let's see. I've already mentioned the fact that this is based on augmented reality technology, and again, really cool concept. I applaud the author from using something other than virtual reality, but there's a really good reason why a lot of stories use VR over AR. One is because the audience and the character in the story is immersed in the game world when they're in virtual reality. Like if they want to get out of that game, if they want to leave that system, that world, they have to get out of their pod, and then it's just a shift into normal reality. And there can be two different storylines there. With augmented reality, the main character, and this happens in the story in particular, there's a loss of immersion because it's actually in the real world, and there are just overlays of game mechanic stuff. And anytime the main character takes off the headset, which happens way the heck too much, I lost that feeling of immersion, because then at that point, the main character is describing a bunch of dark, empty rooms. You know what I mean? And then he had to put the goggles back on, and there was a definite effort to have to re-immerse the reader in the story again, as opposed to just existing in that game world and all being there like 100% of the time whenever the game mechanics were there, remember the game story was there. So the augmented reality, while it's a great and novel idea as far as like introducing RPG mechanics, it didn't work here well because the main character just kept taking the AR headset off way too much to reassure himself that what he was seeing wasn't real. And I get it's part of like creating suspense in the story. It's just that, again, there was a definite loss of tension and immersion when, as often as like taking off the headset happened. So there you go. Also, the story really does rely heavily on like the Lovecraft name to try to establish a sense of like atmosphere in the story and in the theme park world. There's a lot of, whoa, this is so Lovecraft, and oh, this is just like that Lovecraft novel I read a while ago. And it happens like a ton, especially like in the first 25% of the novel. And it just got on my nerves, and I'd rather the author just describe the Lovecraft elements instead of saying, oh, this is Lovecraft, and this is Lovecraft, and this is Lovecraft, and that is Lovecraft. It just got annoying and boring. So that's just my personal opinion. Also, the main character, super hard to root for. He's a very moody character, very maudlin. And at some point, I almost wanted to see him get like murdered and like lose or something. So there you go. Overall, the story lags in the horror department, and there are a few like genuinely thrilling moments, especially towards like the end of the story. But overall, just not that entertaining for me. It gets a score of 5 out of 10. So there you go. Logout of Cthulhu, a Lovecraftian LitRPG novel, Cthulhu World Book 1, gets a score of 5 out of 10. Not a bad story. Well, technically written. It just never really got entertaining for me, and that might just be the fact that I've seen other stories do this Cthulhu thing better. So there you go. Okay, that's it, everyone. See, such a short episode. Look at that. It's like 40 minutes in and out, all done, 5 stories. So, and again, one of those was just super long. So that's why there's only 5 this week. But again, thanks everyone for hanging out and listening. If you want to follow us on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or Patreon, you can find all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com. If you want to support us in any way, shape, or form. And again, easy ways to support the podcast: share this episode on Facebook or Twitter, any social media outlet you have, so that you and your friends who are as geeky and in maybe possibly into liberty as much as you are can listen to the podcast, and we can all enjoy these stories together. But again, until we can hang out again, folks, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.